Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamana Tira Vanachari Yamana Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Mr. Paramahansa Purajikacharya Astotra to the Sri Srimad Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Purajikacharya Astotra to the Sri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai, Samaveda Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glory to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On the second day of February 2021 in SanDiego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. We are in chapter 7 entitled Knowledge of the Absolute, text number 14 on page 318. Daivi Yesha Gunamayi Daivi Yesha Gunamayi Mama Maya Duratteya Mama Maya Duratteya Mameva Ye Papadyante Mameva Ye Papadyante Mayam Etang Tarantite Mayametang Tarantite Daiviyesha Gunamahi Mama Maya Dodatteya Mameviye Papadyante Mayametang Tarantite Daiviyesha Gunamahi Mama Maya Duratteya Mamevaye Papadyante Mayametang Tarantite. Good. Daiviyesha Gunamahi Mama Maya Duratteya Mamevaye Papadyante Mayametang Tarantite. Daivi Esha Gunamayi Mama Maya Duratya Mameviye Papadyante Mayametang Tarantite Daivi Esha Gunamayi Mama Maya Duratya Mameviye Papadyante Mayametang Tarantite. Daivi, transcendental. He, certainly, Esha, this, Gunamayi, consisting of the three modes of material nature. Mama, my, Maya, energy, Duratya, very difficult to overcome. Mam, unto me, Eva, certainly, Ye, those who, Papadyante, surrender, Mayam, Etam, this illusory energy, Taranti, overcome, Te, they. This divine energy of mine, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is difficult to overcome, but those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. Purport. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has innumerable energies, and all these energies are divine. Although the living entities are part of his energies and are therefore divine, due to contact with the material energy, their original superior power is covered. Being thus covered by material energy, one cannot possibly overcome its influence. As previously stated, both the material and spiritual natures, being emanations from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, are eternal. The living entities belong to the eternal superior nature of the Lord, but due to contamination by the inferior nature, matter, their illusion is also eternal. The conditioned soul is therefore called Nitya Baddha, or eternally conditioned. No one can trace out the history of his becoming conditioned at a certain date in material history. Consequently, his release from the clutches of material nature is very difficult, even though that material nature is an inferior energy, because material energy is ultimately conducted by the Supreme Will, which the living entity cannot overcome. Inferior material nature is defined herein as divine nature due to its divine connection and movement by the divine will. Being conducted by divine will, material nature, although inferior, acts so wonderfully in the construction and destruction of the cosmic manifestation. The Vedas confirm this as follows. Mayam tu prakatim vidyan mahinam tu maheshwaram. Although Maya, illusion, is false or temporary, the background of Maya is the supreme magician, the personality of Godhead, who is Maheshwar, the supreme controller. This from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad 4.10. Another meaning of guna is rope. It is to be understood that the conditioned soul is tightly tied by the ropes of illusion. A man bound by the hands and feet cannot free himself. He must be helped by a person who is unbound. Because the bound cannot help the bound, the rescuer must be liberated. Therefore, only Lord Krishna, or his bona fide representative, the spiritual master, can release the conditioned soul. Without such superior help, one cannot be freed from the bondage of material nature. Devotional service, or Krishna consciousness, can help one gain such release. Krishna, being the Lord of the illusory energy, can order this insurmountable energy to release the conditioned soul. He orders its release out of his causeless mercy on the surrendered soul and out of his paternal affection for the living entity, who was originally a beloved son of the Lord. Therefore, surrender unto the lotus feet of the Lord is the only means to get free from the clutches of the stringent material nature. The words Mam Eva are also significant. Mam means Krishna or Vishnu only, and not Brahma or Shiva. Although Brahma and Shiva are greatly elevated and are almost on the level of Vishnu, excuse me, it is not possible for such incarnations of Rajoguna, passion, and Tamoguna, ignorance, to release the conditioned soul from the clutches of Maya. In other words, both Brahma and Shiva are also under the influence of Maya. Only Vishnu is the master of Maya. Therefore, he alone can give release to the conditioned soul. The Vedas, specifically the Shvetashvatara Upanishad 3.8, confirm this in the phrase Tameva Vidit Va, or freedom is possible only by understanding Krishna. Even Lord Shiva affirms that liberation can be achieved only by the mercy of Vishnu. Lord Shiva says, Mukti Padata Sarvesham Vishnur Eva Nasankshaya. There's no doubt that Vishnu is the deliverer of liberation for everyone. Om Jnana Timurandasya Jnanandana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmidatam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and all members of Sri Parampara. So once again, putting this verse in context, very important verse, often quoted by Srila Prabhupada, and very important for our understanding of Krishna consciousness. Oh, that was close. Almost spilled it. So, the previous verse, Chibur Gunamaya Bhava, deluded by the three modes, goodness, passion, ignorance, the whole world does not know me, who am above the modes and inexhaustible. So the whole world is the material world is being conducted by these three modes. And we'll learn more about them in chapter 14, chapter 17, chapter 18, all kinds of things that are in the mode of goodness, passion, or ignorance, and therefore are attractive for one in the specific modes, just like music. So, the other day I was peacefully sitting at my desk trying to do some work, and somebody parked their car across the street and started like this huge blasting of some abominable music, so-called music. And I was just thinking, well, how could someone be attracted to that, And I've been thinking that for like many, many years, because most of the music, so-called music people listen to. And it went on for a while. I was thinking of calling police, and then I said, no, I'll just take my usual route. I put on my noise-canceling headphones, the whole thing, and it was peace. Eventually they left. But these modes are what the whole world is working by. They're consisting of, right? Daiviyesha Gunamayi. Gunamayi means made of the modes. And that's what this verse means. And the previous verse, he says, Triva Gunamaya Bhava, that Gunamaya means made of these modes. Ebisam Vidam Jagat, the whole universe is made of them. Mohitam Nabijanati. Everyone is bewildered by these three modes, and therefore no one knows me as I am. So in this verse, Krishna says Duratyaya, because if we want to achieve success in our life as human beings, as living entities, then the basic category of that success is liberation. That's a basic principle. If you can get liberation. So liberation implies we're bound up. And here Krishna says that liberation is duratyaya, very difficult. In fact, it's impossible on your own. Even these great impersonalists who have concluded that a body, a form, activities, thoughts, all of these are part of Maya, right? This is what our bondage consists of. Having these bodies with so many desires and the senses and the fears and all this stuff. So, therefore, the impersonalists, especially the Mayavadis, they conclude liberation means no form, no activities. In other words, that famous word we chant every day, nirvishesha. No details, no varieties. That's liberation. It's akin to the Buddhist idea of annihilating the personality like that. So, there's a verse in the Bhagavatam that directly condemns that idea. That those who are not your devotees, but they think they're getting liberation, they only think they get liberation. If by some severe austerity they're able to rise up to the Brahman platform and not have and be absorbed in Brahman, they're not secure there, because it's unnatural for the soul, and eventually they fall down again to this world. So how to get out? So Krishna gives the formula right here. Those who surrender unto him can cross beyond it. And Prabhupada says, easily cross beyond it. So the contrast is between bound hand and foot, really have no way out, or being liberated by surrendering unto Krishna. But as Prabhupada points out in this wonderful purport, is that we need to get the association of someone who's unbound. Now, and we read in Krishna Lila, where Krishna himself, or in the case of Arjuna, he's the guru. But generally, we need to come in contact with somebody who's liberated in this world and is willing to meet us on our own level. Like Srila Prabhupada came, and the greatest thing he did was gave us his own association, and he spoke in English. We could actually understand him. Otherwise, there was no possibility. He spoke in English, he produces books in English, and he tailored the movement so that we could actually take it up. And of course, that was Lord Chaitanya's great gift also. There's no bar. Nam Namakadi Bahodandi, you have so many different names, and there's no bar to chanting them. No rules and regulations for time, person, anything. Anytime, any place, anyone can chant the holy name. And that means you can begin the purifying process. But you won't continue it unless you have association with someone who can guide you, and there's a lot of pitfalls in there. And, just chanting the name once is all auspicious. You get rid of so many eons of sinful reactions. But it's hard to. That's not how you get love of Godhead. Just like the pastime of Ajamil. So Ajamil was liberated because he chanted the name actually without offense. He wasn't chanting for any material purpose. He wasn't. He certainly wasn't. Being inattentive. He may have been chanting for his son, but he was chanting without offense. And so the Vishnu Dutas came. But they didn't take him back to Godhead. Right? And then they left, and he was still alive. And so he immediately renounced everything, went and performed more sadhana with all of this enlightenment, chanted, and then eventually he went back to Godhead. So the point is, he got that association by great good fortune. But the usual way is that some enlightened person meets you, takes the trouble to give you association, give you a chance, and that's what this whole movement is about. So that's why Mamaviya Prapadyante, to surrender to Krishna, really means to surrender to his representative, and through that representative surrender to Krishna. So Prabhupada gives this wonderful analogy of the guna being the rope. These modes of nature, they bind us. And it's important to realize that you're illusioned. If someone in the mode of passion thinks that this is me, that's who I am. And boy, I'm glad I'm not like those guys who are just lying on the street, no, I'm ambitious. I'm going to make it in this world and a responsible citizen, And I'm not an escapist like those people who just like to go off into the country and meditate. This is who I am. But it just happens to be there in that mode, and those who are in the mode of ignorance, often, taking shelter of some kind of intoxication, laziness, or something. This is who you identify with. That your mind is not in order. You prefer sleeping. Ignorance. And mode of goodness, now in that mode, you're more likely to be open and receptive to messages like this. I was just thinking of my own life. I was pretty much in the mode of passion and ignorance. Then I got sick, and I had the good fortune of choosing yoga as my means of getting my health back. I was seriously ill with hepatitis. So, and that put me in touch with, Amala Bhakta. He wasn't Amala Bhakta then. But he was the leader of a yoga studio in New York, and there I was philosophically inclined, so I got, So, but the yoga principle, I took up a vegetarian diet, actually raw food, vegetarian, a lot of juices, and so being more or less in the mode of goodness, certainly more than I had been, I was open to these things. Whereas in the mode of passion, beginning all sign of sinful activity. What does Krishna say actually at the end of this chapter he'll say, Yesham dvandakatam papam jananam punnikarmanam te dvanda mohanir mukta bhajante imam judavrata. Now that bhajante imam judavrata, worshipping Krishna with a firm vow and determination. Who can do that? One has to be finished with sinful activities and performing pious activities. Antagatam papam. Your papa is ended. And then you're free from the delusion of duality, or you're somewhat free, which is explained in the previous verse, Chadvesha Samutena. So then you're more receptive, just like any book distributor knows. Sometimes you can't tell. People look like the ordinary person, but they're fascinated by the books. They're attracted. Whereas 100 other people go by and say, "Oh, no, not me, not for me." It's the Hare Krishnas. But somehow this person has in their background something that makes them a little fascinated, a little interested enough to approach, and then the skilled book distributor will, invite them and they'll take a book, and before you know it, they're chanting and dancing. So, but it has to go through this, to actually cross beyond it, one has to surrender to Krishna. So we are, now the analysis has been taking place in this chapter. The lower energies, the higher energies, we're part of Krishna's energies, but we're categorically different than the material energy. We're para prakriti, and this is apara prakriti. This is no conscious energy. But we're conscious energy, but we're both energies. But because we're part and parcel of Krishna, we're qualitatively the same. We're also purely spiritual. But it's covered, because we're minute, we've been covered over by the material energy. So we're identifying with this material body. And that goes on life after life after life. So the human form is a juncture by which we can actually get out of this prison house that we're in. So, now Prabhupada talks, I wanted to mention this here because he talks about the fall of the jiva here. No one can trace out the history of his becoming conditioned. And there's a certain confusion that can arise because of the terminology. I mean, I remember I studied this a lot because at one point in ISKCON it was very prominent philosophical debates we were having on this. I'll explain that history some other day. But can you see the quandary here? You have these terms Nitya Baddha and Nitya Mukta. Okay, Nitya Mukta means eternally liberated in the spiritual world. Sometimes it's called Nitya Siddha. Okay? And then you have the Nitya Baddhas. Well, how do you figure that? If everything is strictly Nitya, Nitya means Nitya, eternally. Right? Nitya Siddha means they've always been perfect, they've always been liberated, and they always will be liberated. That's really Nitya. Right? And Nitya Baddha means we've always been bound and will always be bound. Well, wait a minute. And what's the point of practicing Krishna consciousness? If we're Nitya Baddha, I mean, we're always going to be bound up. But we know that that's not the program, right? The Nitya Baddhas can become a Nitya Mukta. Otherwise, what's the point? We're going back to God. If it doesn't mean to become eternally liberated and reinstated in our position at Krishna's lotus feet, what does it mean? So there's got to be some flexibility in understanding these terms. And what Prabhupada the phrase he would use, from time immemorial. How long have we been conditioned? We don't know. From time immemorial, 1,000, 1,000,000, 10 million lives of Brahma. We've been coming up and down, and not going back. It's as good as Nitya, right? But it's not Nitya. And Prabhupada explains. You've heard of this phrase, the Crow and Tal letter? Yeah. Did you ever read it? Yeah, I heard it. So he says, this amazing flexibility of time, of the sense of time. Even in this lifetime, you can feel it. For me, the months are just slipping by now, And the years, of course, are going faster too. Well, okay, I mean, I got a few more years left. But when you're younger, when you're really younger, they go slower. You remember when you were 5? I mean, 6 was a long way off. Wasn't it? I'm not 5, I'm 5 1/4. Right? It's just the way it is. It seems to be the percentage of your lived life that is the sense of how fast time is going. Now we get a hint of this, in the pastime of Brahma Vimohan Leela, where he leaves for a moment of his time after putting Krishna's the calves and all the boys under his mystic slumber. Didn't hurt them at all, just put them to sleep to see if Krishna really is God. So he comes back for a moment of his time, which is the year of our time, and during that year, Krishna has been just doing everything normally, And there was no hint that this huge Agasra had been killed. He must have been killed way in the forest, so they couldn't see him. He was 8 miles long. But anyway, so, but the whole time thing, is like Brahma's time. He lives for 100 of his years. It seems like 100 years to him. But what's the figure, of Brahma's time in our years? Trillion and 40 billion. It's just a rounding error when you get up to.
311 trillion, 40 billion years. This is inconceivable. But to him, it feels like 100 years, which is like a snap of a finger or less, So now, apply this to this position of the spiritual world, which is certified in the Brahma Samhita as the place where there's no time. Not a second passes away. He literally says this at the end of the Brahma Samhita. That means it's the eternal present, But then you have the arrangements of the sun rising and the moon rising, so to facilitate the pastimes. So you can say time doesn't pass, but you have the sense of it passing, because otherwise how can you have pastimes anyways? But no one gets older, like that. So when we go back to Godhead, this is explained there in the Crow and Towel letter. Okay, we've been gone so long, we've practiced devotional service, and now we understand our Siddhadeya, our Sarup Siddhi, our relation, we're living in it, we finally go back to Godhead, and it's just like we never left. We pick up the time, it just seems to us like, I just dozed off for a second. And all those trillions of lives. That's how flexible time is. So in that sense, now think of the term Nitya. All right, 10 billion lives of Brahma, we've been floating around in different things. That's Nitya. Certainly when you're in the middle of it, it seems Nitya. But it's not ultimately Nitya. Everybody eventually goes back to Godhead. And on the other side, Nitya Siddha, they may doze off for a minute and fall into ignorance and come down here. That's Prabhupada's explanation. Somehow or other, there's no other explanation. Somehow or other, we develop a desire to compete with Krishna, turn away from him, and we absorb ourselves in the material energy, and we're here. And so that the Nitya Mukta can become a Nitya Baddha, and the Nitya Baddha can become a Nitya Mukta. So the word, you have to have a little flexibility with that word Nitya. So Guna means also rope. We have to find someone who's unbound, who can untie us, and that's the spiritual master. And how does he do that? By giving us instruction, like the Bhagavad Gita. So how to surrender to Krishna? That's the whole process of nectar devotion. Start by chanting the holy name and doing some service, come at the Sunday feast. So that eventually means that in certain places in the Gita it says one doesn't endeavor for anything on his own. In other words, the cue for what you're going to do and what you're not to do always comes from Krishna, directly or through the Shastra and so forth. So you're not doing anything on your own account. Everything is done as part of your duties in Krishna consciousness, because Krishna wants it, and you're simply like a limb. That's you've given up a separate desire, your sense of separateness. We don't merge with Krishna, but our desires do. That's the key. And that's really the definition of pure love. When you're simply, your whole consciousness is focused on how can I please the beloved. That's pure love. There's no lust there. Lust means it's for me. I want to enjoy, I'm going to do this. There's not a tinge of that. That's for the purity in the spiritual world. So this is Krishna. It's divine. This world is divine because it's connected to Krishna, and it's acting ultimately according to His will. We'll learn in chapter 9, Maya Jakshena Prakriti Suyate Sacharacharam, that by my supervision, Prakriti is doing all of this stuff and creating the world, and it's going around and around. Vipadivartate, the universe is working. But Krishna is behind everything. So when we link up to His desires and His will, then we're reestablishing that loving relation with Krishna, and it won't be long before we go back to Godhead. Okay, any local questions or remote questions? Okay, let's see if we have any local comments first.
I was going to ask, so if we're constitutionally made up of the superior energy and Maya is constitutionally the inferior energy, how is it that we can be covered by it? And does that mean that Krishna can also, of course Krishna can do anything, but I know it's described in the pastime of Aghasura that Krishna made himself forget that he was God, and acted kind of afraid for his friends, just for the sake of Leela. But is that kind of the same thing in terms of the conditioned, in terms of the living entities being covered by Maya? that I guess you could say.
Hold it closer,
Like naturally, it would be impossible, but it's only by Krishna's will that it happens. I guess I'm kind of.
Well, Krishna's forgetting he's God. That seems. I don't recall it there. That thing. It was. There's a passage there where he says he's wondering how wonderfully the material energy is working. Is that what you're referring to? When the boys just walked in and everything.
I for some reason remember in Krishna book, Prabhupada saying that Krishna sometimes makes himself forget that he's God.
He does.
Yeah.
He does. That's especially mentioned, I recall, in more detail in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, where Krishna, in his relation with the gopis, in order to enjoy the rasa, of they're joking with each other, they're having quarrels, and separation and all these things. We heard this morning about, and it's still Jayadeva Goswami's disappearance day. So that pastime, I forget the Sanskrit now, it's a famous line, where Krishna is bowing down to Radharani and begging her to forgive him or something, like that, after a little quarrel or whatever. And so, he's not just play acting there. He really wants to feel that he's dependent on her mercy, so to speak, forgiveness, that's the rasa, the loving rasa. So therefore, I remember now, in the fourth chapter of Adi Leela, there's this wonderful passage where Krishna's Kaviraj gets into the mind of Krishna and he reveals what he's thinking. And Krishna is deciding to come 5,000 years ago. And in order to display the highest levels of bhakti for his devotees and enjoy the special. And both the gopis and I will both forget that I'm God. He says right there. And that's part of his pleasure. Just like he wants to also, in relation to his mother, he wants to feel that he's really dependent on her, and that's part of the rasa. So he can do that, but when it comes to us, we're not doing that. We're overwhelmed by the material energy because we're minute, because we're very tiny. Therefore, the material energy, who is acting according to Krishna's will, although it's his inferior energy, when we voluntarily cut ourselves off from Krishna by trying to compete with him, that's when we lose the protection from the material energy. And to the proportion that we're surrendering to Krishna, turning our attention to him, and developing our love for him, Maya releases us. And the release you can tell. It's very you don't have to be told. You don't have to ask. Am I? As Prabhupada, you don't have to ask. Am I advancing? You'll know. The desire to enjoy the material energy goes, at various levels. Things that you were obsessed with or addicted with, you're first disinterested in, and then eventually you're aghast that you're ever interested at all in those things. And you realize what a blessing that is. Because your mind, what is it that prevents us from being Krishna conscious, even when we're trying to be Krishna conscious? The mind, with these latent desires and these latent attitudes, we're actually falling from the spiritual world every day. We're trying to concentrate on chanting Hare Krishna, and the mind isn't letting us, and it's taking us away, habitually. So that's the sadhana. That's the essence of sadhana right there. With the superior intelligence, the strengthened intelligence, taking the mind, putting it back on Krishna. So that's the essence of our surrender. And when we do that, then Maya, her job is done for such a soul who's totally surrendered. She's trying to teach us. Krishna's severe agent, trying to teach us. You can't be happy here, separate from Krishna. I was thinking on when Vijay was describing this morning in this wonderful class, and how, somebody's married for so many years. What was it? There was I married some lady from Thailand, and she took all his money and flew off. But how did that start? There's a spark there. There's love. So-called love. And then there's enjoyment. What is that line? Yehi sang sparja ja bolga dukkha yonayevate. It's one of the most revolutionary lines in the whole Bhagavad Gita. The pleasures that arise from the contact with the senses with their sense objects are causes of misery, and they have a beginning and an end. Therefore, the wise don't delight in them. Text 22 in the 5th chapter. I think it's 22. Yes, 25, 22. An intelligent person doesn't take part in the sources of misery. Well, those sources of misery are the pleasures that are due to a contact with the material senses. And they have a beginning and an end. You know? So there you have it. Sometimes that's just, this verse, the meaning of it is just, that's where my life is now. I thought I could enjoy this lady, this drug, whatever, and now I see I'm so miserable in the end. Right? I mean, isn't that the story of the life of the materialist? And then I just heard Prabhupada talking. He constantly hypes on this theme because it's such an important thing. People can understand it. A person who just walks in for the first time. Yeah, I remember I got involved in this, I got involved in that, and now, that's why I was looking for some solace and I came to Krishna consciousness. So that realization means that we understand these modes that are binding us. They're ultimately for our punishment. We can't try to enjoy them. So that the living entity says waking up and practicing those principles that the fog can lift permanently. Dhanavari, you there? Hello?
Yes, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Very nice verse. Please accept my humble obeisance.
Yes.
Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Jai Srila Prabhupada.
I have a question. Very nice verse. Everything you explain very nicely. It's really, really helpful in a practical way. One question I have, actually two small questions. One is, so Maya is not bad after all, we think Maya is bad, but we say we are in Maya or not. But Maya is helping us in a way.
Yeah, if we see it that way. Maya is not bad. She's Krishna's servant. But we're such rascals that we need to be, reformed. And sometimes we need some good lessons. But it doesn't help us if we just suffer in this world without coming in touch with the knowledge of why we're suffering and how we can mitigate the suffering. That's the thing. Otherwise, we look for some material solution. Political solution, if I just had more money, if I just had someone else, you go lifetime after lifetime with these material solutions. And what does Prahlad Maharaj say? I love this verse, it's perfect for this. In his prayers to Lord Nrsingadev, he says, Yasmat priya priyaviyoga sayoga janma shokagnina sakadayona shadayamana dukkaushadam tadapi dukkam atadhyaham bhumam brahmami vadame tapadasya yogam. This is a great verse. It's complementary to this. So he's saying, I've been burning, I and all other conditioned souls in this world. I've been burning in the fire of lamentation due to this fact of life. He said, Priya and Apriya Viyoga Samyoga. Sayoga. What does that mean? So that's when those things which are dear to us, beginning with our body, and those dear to us, so many things, eventually are taken away from us. They're ripped away from us. My dear wife, girlfriend, she left me, oh God. It's so that's called the Shoka Agnina. And on the other side, those things which you don't want, like the pandemic, are forced upon you. Is anyone volunteering for this pandemic? They're forced upon you. Old age, the whole list. So both of those sides, it's called a Shoka Agnina. And not just in the human form, Sakada Yonishu, in all different species, the same thing is going on. This is the material life. Dukkāliyam, ashashvatam. So now in the human form of life, we have all kinds of strategies with our big brain to have a remedy for the dukkha. Right? Like we got the vaccine now. So we're going to get through this. This is our dukkha, literally a remedy, is an herbal remedy, aushadhi for the dukkha. But that remedies produce more suffering. Now, in the short term, okay, maybe just like, we conquered smallpox, we conquered polio with vaccine and this and that, so we're going to conquer this, But then it says that produces dukkha aushadam tadapi dukkam, more misery. And one of the main foundational ways that it produces misery It convinces you that you can solve your problems by some material means, and so it keeps you in the material world where you just, suffer all kinds of things. And all rising from this atadhyaham, which has different meanings, but this Prabhupada's, translation. Atadhyaham, I am thinking I'm something I'm not. I'm thinking I'm this material body. That's the root of the whole problem. And then the last line he gives a solution. He's speaking to Narada Shringadev, delicate little Prahlad with this huge, man lion, who's now gentle because his beloved Prahlad is there. He's raging. So much blood everywhere. His father. He's wearing a garland of intestines. There was a devotee named Antarmali when I joined. No one knew what it meant. After a year, I found out what it meant. The garland of intestines. This is he was wearing a garland of intestines. A name for Lord Nrsingadev. That might be your name when you get initiated. So the last time, Bhuman Bhamame Badaneta, this wandering soul, please instruct me in your Dasi Yoga, your Bhakti Yoga. That's the only way that this whole thing can be mitigated. So it's a very graphic and poetic version of the same idea. It's impossible to cross over it and to do kaliyam, but so if you surrender to Krishna, then you'll be under the protection of the internal energy, and your suffering will be mitigated and finally ended permanently. All right, can we go on, Dhanavai? Can I go on to the next verse?
One more small thing. It says it says Shiva and Lord Shiva and Brahma are greatly elevated, are almost on the level of Vishnu. So almost like it's...
Well, the way we learn in a different context is that Brahma is usually a living entity, very exalted living entity, but he's a living entity, special living entity who's qualified, rare soul who can, populate the universe, do what he does, manage the whole universe. Whereas Lord Shiva is his tattva all his own. He's not Vishnu tattva, he's not Jiva tattva, he's Shiva tattva. And what it's described as, he's Vishnu in touch with the material energy. Because Mahavishnu, he doesn't touch, he just glances. Right? And that's the way he injects all of the... But Shiva, he's that, in explanation of Brahma Samhita, you read it, he is that glance. And so he's impregnating, with the material energy. And so he's in a different role. And it's a little bit difficult to understand because Prabhupada directly says here, they're also controlled, right, by the material energy. Right? And yet our Brahma, he's the head of our Sampradaya. We want to understand that he's, transcendental. And certainly Shiva, Vaishnavanam Shadayada Shambhu, he's the greatest Vaishnav. So he's above the material energy. But neither of them is able to give liberation. They're not able to give bhakti. Because they work so closely with the modes of nature. Brahma with passion, Shiva with ignorance, especially during his destruction, and pastimes, Tandava Nritya. So that's the idea. But there's three tattvas there: the Vishnu tattva, the Shiva tattva, and the Jiva tattva. It was Brahma, generally. Although sometimes, when there's no qualified person, Shiva himself will become Brahma. Really. Okay. All right. I want to go on. The next verse is.
So much Hare Krishna. Yes. Thank you, Hare Krishna.
So text 15 is also highly quoted and is a long purport. We may not get through it all tonight. So Prabhupada would often quote this because it's. Don't blame me. I'm not saying that you're a Buddha if you don't surrender to Krishna. It's Krishna saying. Okay, text 15. Namam dushkrita no mudha pabadyante naradama maya purita jnana asaram bhavamashita. Those miscreants who are grossly foolish, who are lowest among mankind, whose knowledge is stolen by illusion, and who partake of the atheistic nature of demons, do not surrender unto me. Now remember that the same word is used prapadyante in this verse as the previous verse. So by surrendering to Krishna, you can cross beyond material energy, go back to God. But here's those who don't. Purport. It is said in the Bhagavad Gita that simply by surrendering oneself unto the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can surmount the stringent laws of material nature. Yes, it's said in the Bhagavad Gita in the previous verse. At this point, a question arises. How is it that educated philosophers, scientists, businessmen, administrators, and all the leaders of ordinary men do not surrender to the lotus feet of Sri Krishna, the all-powerful personality of Godhead? Mukti, or liberation from the laws of material nature, is sought by the leaders of mankind in different ways and with great plans and perseverance for a great many years and births. But if that liberation is possible by simply surrendering unto the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then why don't these intelligent and hard-working leaders adopt this simple method? The Gita answers this question very frankly. Those really learned leaders of society like Brahma, Shiva, Kapila, the Kumaras, Manu, Vyas, Devala, Asita, Janaka, Prahlad, Bali, and later on Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, Sri Chaitanya, and many others, who are faithful philosophers, politicians, educators, scientists, etc., do surrender to the lotus feet of the Supreme Person, the all-powerful authority. Those who are not actually philosophers, scientists, educators, administrators, etc., but who pose themselves as such for material gain, do not accept the plan or path of the Supreme Lord. They have no idea of God. They simply manufacture their own worldly plans and consequently complicate the problems of material existence in their vain attempts to solve them. Dukkha aushadam tadavidukam. Exactly there, right? The aushadhi is source of more dukkha. Because material energy, or nature, is so powerful, it can resist the unauthorized plans of the atheists and baffle the knowledge of the planning commissions. The atheistic plan makers are described herein by the words duskritina, or miscreants. Kriti means one who has performed meritorious work. The atheist plan maker is sometimes very intelligent, and meritorious also, because any gigantic plan, good or bad, must take intelligence to execute. But because the atheist's brain is improperly utilized in opposing the plan of the Supreme Lord, the atheistic plan maker is called duskriti, which indicates that his intelligence and efforts are misdirected. In the Gita, it is clearly mentioned that material energy works fully under the direction of the Supreme Lord. That's in the 9th chapter. It has no independent authority. It works as the shadow moves, in accordance with the movements of the object. But still, material energy is very powerful, and the atheist, due to his godless temperament, cannot know how it works, nor can he know the plan of the Supreme Lord. Under illusion and the modes of passion and ignorance, all his plans are baffled, as in the case of Hiranyakashipu and Ravana, whose plans were smashed to dust, although they were both materially learned as scientists, philosophers, administrators, and educators. These dushkritinas, or miscreants, are 4 different patterns as outlined below. So I'm going to stop here because it's getting late. I'm just going to talk a little about this section, and we'll proceed tomorrow with the rest of this purport, which is very rich. So the simple process, I mean, it just says, surrender unto me. Those who surrender unto me can cross beyond it. In other words, all your problems can be solved by that simple process. But they don't do it. These who are dushkritis and fools, lowest of mankind, and maya aprita whose knowledge is stolen away by illusion. So it's very tricky in one sense, because the way in which we're bound here is through this maintenance of our illusion, covering our intelligence with these modes, so that we think we have the solution. Just like now, like this, to think about the climate change thing. You know, I'm working on a book. Have you ever seen the book Divine Nature? Have you ever heard of it? Came out in the 90s, and it was a mass distribution book for a while. It kind of has been not so current, but we wanted to redo it because the issue is still very pertinent, and we have the answer. So I'm going through it. And you know what really is remarkable is that here you have this worsening problem. I mean, the evidence of it is all over the place. I mean, they just had a snowstorm or storms in New Jersey, 32 inches of snow. That's a lot of snow. That's like a record, you know. And you know, every year, it's record warm in Arctic and in the Arctic, and it's doing all this stuff. And these horrific storms and the fires. I mean, no one can deny that it's happening, you know. But people still deny, no, it's just a natural thing, you know. They don't want to, they're in denial, so to speak. But even this very pandemic it can be traced back to the practices of animal slaughter and all of this wild, and this stuff that's going on in China. I don't have to outline it, But the point is that it's human caused. It's anthropogenic climate change. So, all right, well, let's do something about it. Then you have people in different modes. Those in mode of goodness. Well, okay, well, let's get it together. Let's have they have these meetings. They had one in Rio de Janeiro. They had the Paris Accord right now. But the problem is that they built up all of this technology, and all of their economies are based on burning these fuels and the fossil fuel thing, and they're locked in. There's only one solution. They have to live much more simply. You can't have all this extravagant exploitation of the material energy in all its forms and expect to have peace, or have, this is, the reaction is coming. So, and you can see people in different modes. Well, those who are in the mode of goodness, say, well, come on, let's just, live off give up this meat, and we don't need all these meat, can live very simply vegetarian, and that'll solve a lot of the problem, and be, learn to find that source of happiness within, which is our, which really is the solution. But those who are in the mode of passion don't want to hear that. They've got the job, they got the debts to pay off, they're committed to this, they got the children, this and that, We got to find a way to stop all this horrible environmental stuff, but let me keep my job and get this. In other words, they want to to maintain the cause of the whole problem. When you multiply it times hundreds of millions of people in big, and that's to solve the solution. You can't do that. It's not going to work. So it's exactly this thing. You have, people who are the nature of demons. Sometimes they're very qualified in thinking, but they're up against this inevitable thing in the material energy that you can't exploit it and try to enjoy it and still expect to have happiness and peace. It's not going to work. Eventually your plans all crash, and all kinds of horror takes place. So that's what he's talking about here, is that you have these different categories, which we'll read about tomorrow. But Buddhas, we talked about, you have to be Buddha, not Buddha. Remember that? That word Buddha comes in. Intelligent, you have to be a little dearer and thoughtful, and use your intelligence to receive this knowledge, which is not meant for different ways of increasing your sense gratification. But it's a whole different way of understanding who you are and what the real platform of enjoyment is, and what your mission in life is. So that's the hard part, where people who are confirmed in their ways of thinking about things and their themselves and their place in the world and what the meaning of all this, they have to come to the point of throwing it all away, and that's why it's hard for older people. The best student candidates are young people, intelligent people, colleges. In the early days, you can see that even to this day, because they haven't committed yet, and they're open to philosophical inquiry. Once you commit to a certain way of being and thinking, and you put half your life energy in it, you don't want to admit, I made a really wrong turn. It's just old can't turn, treat old dogs, new tricks, that type of thing. But so that's a practical point. But you can't get around the central fact that the entire effort to exploit nature and enjoy your senses, whether it's a wonderful opera in the mode, and music in the mode of goodness, passion, or ignorance, it's still material. That will eventually bring great suffering, individually and collectively. There's no alternative but to surrender to Krishna and to learn the art and really take an entire overhaul of your whole life and make a revolution in your life. That's why Bhagavatam begins with that. Dharma projita kaita votra. We're kicking out all the so-called dharmas that are based on material motive. And tadvagvasoga janataga viplava. These words are meant to bring about a revolution in society, and that the revolution starts in everyone's heart and consciousness. And so that's we're experiencing the benefit of it by taking part in the process sincerely. And we have a mission to become advanced as we can, and to propagate this truth as widely as possible. It's the only solution, and that's what this movement is all about. All right, it's 8:11. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Hari Bol. Zoom tomorrow.